Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Nicholas Phillips, and I will be serving as your host and moderator. Today, we're talking all about listening, but not just to respond, but also listening to understand. Joining us is Angela Noble-Grange, who is a senior lecturer at the S.C. Johnson College of Business. Angela also happens to be one of the faculty authors of our Corporate and Persuasive Communications certificate programs. Angela, thank you so much for joining us. I'm really, really looking forward to our conversation today.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited.
I am too. And just real quick, audience, before we get started, we will be fielding your questions throughout. So please feel free to drop your questions there in the viewer chat, and I promise we'll get to as many of those as we can. We also have a couple questions for you as well. So you can go ahead and scan the QR code with your phone. We have just two questions for you that we're going to ask you throughout the conversation. You can also find the link to the poll also in the viewer chat as well. So you can either scan it there or look at the viewer chat there. So before we get started, audience, we have a question for you. So our conversation obviously today is all about listening. So we want to know, how would you rate your listening skills on a scale from just, kind of 1 to 5 real quick? And Angela, when I was thinking about this question, I was thinking about, I would probably say I'm maybe about like a 2.5, 3, like right in the middle. I feel like sometimes I definitely listen and I'm like, okay, how am I going to respond to that for sure? So definitely not a great listener by any means.
Then you're probably not like most people in that most people overestimate their listening skills. So you're being more reflective and getting a sense of, maybe it's not perfect. Maybe it's not a 5. I've got room to grow.
Mhm. And what would you say most people, say their listening skills are at? Would you say most people say they're a 4 or 5, just kind of, in your past experiences?
Yeah, when I've taught this course before, most people are in the 3 to 4 range.
Okay.
So, but when the course is over, they have a completely different view of where their listening skills are. But they generally, I almost never get somebody who says 5 and almost never get somebody who says 1.
Oh, okay, well that's good to know. And audience, thank you so much for your response. So we're slowly starting to get some, and it looks like they're, kind of right in the middle there, right at about, 3. So that's always good to hear. And would you say with your, students, that's kind of about where it's at, about the, 2.5, 3 range?
Well, I don't know. This audience might be a little bit better with their reflecting. Usually I'd say 3 to 4.
Okay.
So this audience is, I think it's skewing more 2 to 3. Is that what you said?
Yep, about, 2.5, 3-ish is about what we're seeing.
Mhm. Yeah,
So
that's great.
that's always good to hear. Well, audience, thank you again for your responses. So, before we kind of delve into the, nooks and crannies of our conversation, obviously listening is a big key of our title today. So, my first question, really, just kind of as a baseline, is how do you define listening, Angela?
Yeah, I think that's a really important question, Nicholas. So, a lot of times when people say they're listening or they have really great listening skills, they might be talking more about using their ears and they're actually hearing a message, but listening requires so much more than that. And so I kind of did some searching around before I created the course that I teach.
Mhm.
And there was this definition by a writer by the name of Alice Duyer Miller. She lived in the late 1800s and the early 1900s, and she wrote a lot of poetry and she was kind of a political activist. And her definition is my favorite. And what she talks about is taking a vigorous human interest in what is being shared with you. And what's important about that is I like the vigorous word because it means more interest than maybe normally you would take in listening to another human being and actually having an interest in what they are saying. So, and it's simple. It's a short definition, and I absolutely love it. Chat GPT, which has become very popular amongst people, has a much lengthier definition. I like their definition too, but it's so long I can never remember it. So anyone who's interested in seeing can just go to their Chat GPT and say define listening, and they will also get a very accurate definition. But this one by Alice Miller, very short and captures very well what the Chat GPT definition is as well.
I love that actually, and I will definitely keep that in the memory there. And just, generally speaking, how often would you say, or rather, what's the percentage of folks who say, um, or what percentage would you say people listen versus talk, just in normal communication settings?
Yeah, as long as we're not talking about effectively listening. But what research has shown is that when you think about our waking hours, somewhere, depending on your life and what you do for a living, right? And whether you listen to a lot of music, which is not what we're talking about here, but the time we spend listening is anywhere between 20% to all the way up to 50% of your waking hours. So it's a lot of time. But for some reason, in grade school, in undergraduate, even in graduate level, you will not see a lot of courses on how to do it well. So getting training in listening is hard to come by.
Mhm. And, one thing for me is I'm not a huge fan of like, awkward silences and things like that. So I feel like I ramble a lot. I'm one of those for sure. So, I'd be interested to know what role does, silence play when we're, talking about listening?
Silence actually gives people, either the speaker or the listener, an opportunity to reflect on what is being shared. So often when I'm talking about listening, people will say, well, I don't want silence because if I stop talking, then the person that I'm speaking to is going to interrupt, or they're going to say something and I'm going to lose my chance to finish my thinking. So I often will say, well, there's a few things you could actually say to allow that space for silence. And you could say something like, wow, that was really important. I just want a second to reflect on that. Would that be okay with you? And just signal that right now I'm going to take this moment. I'm going to be silent and allow this reflection. So just telling somebody that's what you want to do will prevent that whole interruption piece when you're just trying to reflect on what another person is saying. It takes time, Nicholas, to get comfortable with silence, but if you practice it, it can be very, very powerful.
Yeah, I definitely have to get used to that. The pauses and the awkward silences. And with that, is it okay for us, anytime we're listening to ask the person to maybe just pause and let us kind of digest what they're trying to say?
Yeah, it's just how you say it, right? So, in the example that I gave, I'm trying to show that the reason that I'm pausing, the reason that I want to have some silence is because what you said is so significant to me, so important to me. It requires some time for me to really think about it. And then you're sort of asking, is it okay for me to do this? And then, yeah, in those cases, I'd say it would be totally fine.
Perfect. I love that. And with that audience, we have our second question for you. So the first question, we asked a couple minutes ago. We want to know what was something you found challenging when it came to listening to the person you were talking to. Just this could be anything, just a recent conversation you had, maybe last night at dinner, something along those lines. I would definitely say, one of the challenges that I face, Angela, is sometimes people don't pause enough. So they just kind of talk and talk and talk. And I'm like, wait, just give me 1 second to let you digest. I also take notes as well, especially when I'm on meetings and things. And I feel like maybe sometimes folks don't think that I'm listening when I'm just writing down notes. It's just how I remember.
Mhm.
What have you found?
What have I found for what? What's a
It's,
problem for us?
yeah, yeah.
Boy, there's all kinds of things that get in the way of people being able to listen well. I wanted to go back to what you said about taking notes, though. So
Mhm.
often I'll take notes too, especially in meetings, because I don't know, the older I get, there's so much in my brain that trying to focus on it and remember it becomes even more difficult. So I'll let somebody know. I hope you don't mind if I take notes. I'm listening to everything you say. I want to be able to remember it later. And so this is why, I'm taking the notes.
Mhm.
The other kinds of barriers that come into play, things like our own ego.
Okay.
So we often think that we know the world according to us is the world. And so that can get in the way of effective listening because you're not able to then permit another way of thinking
Mhm.
into your brain and to really try to understand what another human being might be trying to express to you. So that's a big one. The phone is another really big distraction, and you'll sometimes be at dinner. I have been lately, and you'll watch an entire family or an entire group of people at dinner, and everybody's on their phone.
Mhm.
Everyone's in their own little world, and I don't know, there's not even conversation going. And if there is, people are distracted by their telephone. So that's something that you want to maybe think about getting rid of when you're having a conversation with somebody. There's so many other barriers. There are other distractions, our own thoughts that we're having. We might have a meeting coming up or some really big presentation, and somebody's coming into our office and wants to talk to us, and yet our mind is someplace else. And so that gets in the way of effective listening as well. I could go on and on, but I think that's enough that maybe the audience can relate to some of those barriers.
Yeah, and it looks like we're, slowly starting to get some responses in. It looks like really kind of the big one was, interruptions, obviously emotions. Like you said, we have our heads can be all over the place. Do you find that a lot of people, when they're trying to listen, often, maybe interrupt the person that they're speaking with, or, kind of like you said, with their, own perception of things, maybe interjecting their own thoughts?
Mm. Yes, I think when people interrupt,
Mhm.
there's a couple of things going on. Sometimes they interrupt to show, they think they're showing, oh yeah, I got you, I got you. I know exactly what you're going to say next. Here it is. And
Mhm.
so they kind of take the conversation over, take it away from the original speaker.
Mhm.
Sometimes they interrupt because they're losing patience with the individual who is speaking to them. And so they just want to end it. And so they interrupt the conversation so they can get on to something else.
Mhm.
Yeah, interruption is not really a good listening habit.
That's good to know, audience. Again, thank you for your responses. And if you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the viewer chat. You mentioned, some of the barriers that can kind of affect us when we're, kind of listening and things like that. What are some ways we can kind of overcome some of these challenges? I'm thinking about, just kind of our own, biases when it can come to, certain topics and things like that.
Mhm. Even with that question, I could probably think of a bunch of different things depending on what the barrier to listening happening happens to be. But I think number one, you have to be kind to yourself. Listening takes an incredible amount of energy, and we don't always have that amount of energy that it takes to be a really effective listener. So, we listen on all different levels. Sometimes we are just listening so that we can say what we want to say, and we're not going to be the most listening on the highest level. Okay. A lot of what I'm going to talk to you about today is listening on the highest level. But sometimes you're just not there. You don't have the energy. And it would be fair to tell the person if they need that high level of energy from you for listening that maybe this isn't the moment and perhaps we should have this conversation at a different time. If
Mhm.
it's simply like simple barriers or your phone or your thoughts, there are ways to work on removing those distractions and barriers. And a lot of times, like your thoughts, if you've got a bunch of things on your mind, for some people, it helps to just write those things down on a piece of paper, write how you're going to take care of them, and just get them out of your head so that you can then focus entirely on the person in front of you. Sometimes you just think those thoughts, but you don't express them necessarily to the individual who's asking for your time, right? You can think them, give yourself permission to think them, but don't express them because in this moment you're playing listener, not speaker. There are a couple of suggestions. The phone, often when I go out to eat or I go someplace now, my habit is to turn my phone face down and silent as a signal to the individual who I'm having dinner with or I'm speaking with that this phone is not my priority right now. You are my priority right now. Removing it altogether is even better. But sometimes, you may not be in a situation where you can do that easily. So.
And I actually just got a really interesting question in from Sandra. So Sandra wanted to know, do you believe people can truly active listen and multitask at the same time?
No, I don't truly believe that. And Sandra, that's a great question. Thank you for asking that. And I'll say why I don't believe that. So sometimes I like to play around in the world of applied neuropsychology. I know it sounds bigger than it is, but I really do like to hear what the people who study the brain are saying. And the people who study the brain are saying multitasking is something you cannot do. So if you think about it, if your brain can only focus or give primary energy to like one thing. Now, it can give backup energy to some things, but it can't give primary energy. So if you're trying to listen and listen effectively at a very high level, multitasking is going to get in your way. You just can't do it.
Mhm.
I'm sorry, Sandra, if that's something that you want to be able to do.
No, that's helpful, Sandra. Thank you for the question. And Stephanie checks in with kind of a similar question. So Stephanie wanted to know when it comes to neurodiversity, how can one become a better listener? Or is it a good idea to just share that you may have obstacles when obviously listening?
I think she answered her own question on the second part of that. I think that you may need to say something. Now, I don't study neurodiversity. It has come up in my workshops, and so maybe I need to spend a little bit more time on that. But there are definitely things that are occurring, particularly in the brain. We are all wired differently. And sometimes it's just a physical thing or a chemical thing that gets in the way of our ability to listen effectively. I have heard people who are diagnosed with ADD or ADHD tell me it's really hard to focus for a long period of time in a conversation or to listen to a lecture. When you become aware of this and you let the individual who's speaking to you know about this, and if you have some strategies that you've developed to be able to do it in smaller pieces or chunks, it's that way both people in the conversation are aware of what's going on and nobody's assuming that somebody is not listening or not wanting to pay attention. So that's a great question.
Yes, thank you for that, Stephanie. We really appreciate it. And just one last audience question before kind of we move on, and we'll ask some more a little bit later. But Santiago wanted to know how can you interrupt when the message has been received many times. So we were talking a little bit before about pauses in conversations and everything like that, and pausing and listening. How can we maybe interrupt someone when they're talking to let them know, like, okay, I got you.
I'm trying to I'm trying to get clear on what this question, the intention behind this question might be. And since I don't have Santiago right here, I'm going to give it my best shot. I'm thinking this is what I've heard in previous workshops on this. People will say, there's this person at my office and they always come in and they're always complaining. It's always the same complaint. And they tell me over and over again. And I really don't want to hear it right now. I don't want to listen to it right now. So if you can name the emotion, and you can say something like, wow, it seems like this thing is whatever this thing is that they constantly say is really bothering you right now. It seems like it's really causing you a lot, disturbing you, it's bothering you. Name a feeling that you think this individual might be having that's underneath of all of this complaining or restating something a lot of times, and say, because you have mentioned it like several times in the last couple of days. So I'm starting with the feeling. I don't want to say, oh my God, that's all you ever talk about. Can you please stop? Obviously, that would be rude. And depending
Mhm.
on the relationship, if you want that relationship to continue, that's probably not the best approach. But it really seems like this issue is bothering you because you've mentioned it several times in the last couple of days or the last hour. What can we do to resolve this so that you don't have this issue or problem in the future? So you're trying to take it forward and stop this conversation, but doing it in a nice way. And again, the key is naming the feeling. What do you think is happening for this person that they have to mention this to you so many times or repeat something so many times? Something is left unresolved. You're trying to figure that out.
I love that. And Santiago, thank you for that question. One of the questions I was thinking about, and we talked a little bit about previously, was can body language affect listening, or how does body language affect us when we are actively listening?
Yeah, for our listeners, they probably know or have heard somewhere along the line that when our spoken message and our non-spoken message are out of alignment, people will believe the unspoken first, right? So the body language that you're talking about or the nonverbal communication, they'll believe that if it's not in alignment with the words that you speak. When you're listening, the same is true. So if you have the ability to sort of lean forward and show that you are paying attention to this individual, making eye contact with the person as opposed to looking away all of the time, but trying to make eye contact, but not in a way that you're staring and making it uncomfortable, but that you are showing them that you're trying to connect through the eyes, nodding your head occasionally. All of those are nonverbal signals that you are making this person your number one priority when you are listening to them. There's other things that might seem less obvious. So when you think about your office space that you have, is it conducive to a conversation, especially if people are coming in and there might be something difficult that they want to share with you? If you have a desk that's a barrier between you and the person, that might be something that you want to move away from your desk, or maybe you have another area where you can remove the barrier of the desk and have the conversation without it. So if there's other things like that, the other thing I told you was when I put my phone face down, that's a nonverbal signal that I'm not reading my phone, I am paying attention to you. So nonverbal communication absolutely plays a huge role in showing someone that you are listening to them.
And with that, you had mentioned, just very briefly, having kind of hard conversations, potentially removing the desk. We just got an audience question in and they just wanted to know, do you have any advice on how I can develop listening when they knew that the content is, either disappointing or annoying or very tough? So any advice on that?
Yeah, and Nicholas, you just mentioned three different, I think two or three emotion words, and that is the key. When things are tough, there are emotions involved, both on the speaker side and the listener side. And so the listener is trying to get a sense for what is the emotion that is being expressed by the speaker, and can I name it? And by naming it, what happens is the speaker feels validated. And I feel like listening is a gift and one that we often don't receive. And so if we do listen to another human being and they feel heard and they feel validated, it's a gift. It's a precious gift. It doesn't matter if you agree with them or you disagree with them. You've just given them something that they often don't get on a daily basis, and that is validation or understanding. So for you to do that in uncomfortable situations, right, you have to kind of get a sense for your own emotions and what your own emotional triggers are so that you're not triggered, so that you can then offer that understanding and validation to another person when you're playing the listener role.
Mhm. And, a lot of our conversation really, has been about, this kind of one-on-one listening, just kind of between two people. I'd be interested to know, can these kind of same principles be applied when we're listening in a group setting?
Yes, and it depends. Like I was thinking group settings, like maybe a meeting where there might be five or six
Mhm.
people around a table. When you're in a situation like that, somebody asks a question, of course you'll need to practice good listening to make sure that you actually understand the question, but then also the intent. So remember when Santiago asked this question, I was trying to think beneath the words of the question and what might the intent of the question be. So in a group setting, somebody asks a question, yes, your listening skills are going to be important so that you can figure that out and respond appropriately. There's also like the vibe of the room, if you will. So you may have an entire crowd of 300 people and you are speaking to them about something, but then you're also listening. Did you listen well in the beginning so what you prepared matches what that audience might want? So you did your listening before you even came into the room. And then as you're in the room speaking to a group of 300 people, are you listening to the vibe? Are their eyes with you? Are they nodding their heads? And do they look like they're listening so that you're actually hitting the mark? You're actually providing value to that particular group. So I would say, yeah, it's a skill that you can use both one-on-one and in a group setting.
And I do have a question for you, but it's kind of along the lines of an audience question that we got in. So I wanted to get to their
Okay.
question first. So
Okay.
Julian just wanted to know how can a person identify keywords or phrases to have the ability to respond to those who may have talked too much? And I would just further expand that to say, are there certain keywords that, we can just kind of pick up on?
So we as the listener, and
Yeah.
somebody is what
Is
they're
speak. So when we're listening, are there, keywords or key phrases, that maybe can kind of help us to show that we understand what they're saying?
well, that would go into the whole listening model, I think, that we're going to be talking about in a moment. But
Mhm.
keywords and phrases, I'm going to keep talking about emotions and being able to name the emotions that somebody is expressing, because we are human beings. And while I teach in a business school and people like to talk a lot about data, the people making the decisions, the people that you're going to have relationships with, they're human. We have emotions and we feel a lot of things, but our emotional vocabulary is so weak that we're unable to actually understand what it is that somebody else is trying to express to us. And we're having a hard time even understanding our own emotions. So I would listen. I'm not sure I'm getting to the response that this listener or the listener wants, but I would try to listen for what is underneath the words of what the individual is trying to express to me. Can I name the emotion? And then by naming it, the other person probably feels a little more validated.
Yeah, maybe we can get a little bit more from what they were asking. But with that, I want to kind of delve a little bit into the idea of listening in the RASA model. What do kind of the different letters in RASA stand for? And can you just kind of give us a quick overview of just kind of what the model is in general?
Yeah, absolutely. So I like to refer to it as rasa. And rasa in Sanskrit, which is an ancient Indian language, means essence. All right. And this model was actually developed by Julian Treasure. Julian Treasure is a sound expert. He has a couple of TED Talks if you're interested. I would encourage your audience to go take a look at his TED Talks. One of them is how to be heard better, right? How to speak so that you're heard better. And another one is all about listening. So the rasa model comes from him. And this is what it stands for. Take notes if you'd like to remember this later. But the R is receive. And all of that means is what we talked about earlier, when it's just sort of clearing your mind of your own thoughts, trying to empty it out so that you're there 100% for the individual who is going to be talking to you. Okay. The A is more appreciate or attend. That's what the A stands for. And appreciate or attend is signaled by things like nodding your head, leaning forward, and some of the other things we were talking about earlier. All right. So we have receive for the R,
Mhm.
attend for the A. Now it gets harder. The S stands for summarize. And this goes back to what I was talking to before with summarizing. You're listening to what somebody is saying, and then you're trying to put it into your own words, right? So they feel like you've heard them, but not parrot back everything that they've said. Put it into your own words, and then you want to check in with what you think they might be expressing. So, for example, it might go something like this. You sound really frustrated about that. Is that right? Were you feeling frustrated? So what I've done is name the emotion that it felt like the person was having as they were describing the story or telling me something that occurred to them in that day. And then I'm checking in, which is different from saying you're frustrated.
Okay.
If I say you're frustrated, it's almost like I'm saying this is how you're feeling. And many people don't want us to tell them how they're feeling, but we can check in with what we think is happening. And I wanted to expand on that just for a second longer, because I think it's really important that people understand that as we go about in this world, right? Every one of us is so incredibly unique. I have I won't tell you how many years, but a lot of years of experience on this earth. My experiences are all different from, say, you, Nicholas, who
Mhm.
has much less number of years of experience than I do, I'm sure. But you have your experiences. So as we are having like a speaking and listening, a conversation, I'm seeing things through my frame, and I'm trying desperately to understand them from your frame. So by listening to you carefully, by naming the emotions I think you might be having, by checking in with you, I'm helping me understand and you to understand that I got you. I understood what you said. If I get it wrong in the S or summarize, you now have the opportunity to elaborate and course correct. That's what that S or the summarize piece means. And this can be hard for people.
Mhm.
The last letter, A, is ask. And this is where you signal to the speaker, tell me some more about this. So to arrive at this conclusion, and you're asking them for even more information than what they had given you already. When you ask for more, the person feels like, wow, you're really interested in hearing more about my story. You're interested in me. It's really a wonderful way of expressing that you care about what is being shared with you.
And I'd be interested to know, we just got a really interesting question in with the receive piece. So Greg just wanted to know, are there questions that we can use to check in with ourselves when it comes to listening? Like, am I listening or am I waiting to talk? So are there, things we can do or questions that we can ask ourselves to make sure that we know, like, hey, I'm here to listen and not just listen to respond?
Yeah, I think, Greg, if you try the model out, it'll work. So if you just you got to clear your thinking to begin with, right? So that R is to just get rid of whatever thoughts you're having. And if you struggle with that, trying the writing things down first, or, if you've got things on your mind, you're overwhelmed by things, try to plan out when you're going to take care of it so that when this individual comes into your office, or you meet this person for lunch or dinner or wherever the conversation is happening, that you are clearing your mind for the conversation. I'm not sure I have questions that I would ask myself, because then it's back to me again. And when you're listening, this is really about the other person and not about you.
Mhm. And one thing I'd be interested to know is, you mentioned, obviously emotions a lot and how, emotions can play into, kind of how we
Mhm.
listen. So I'd really be interested to know, how important is, empathy in active listening, and, how can we cultivate it really just kind of in our day-to-day interactions?
I love that question. Thank you for that, Nicholas, because empathy is everything, right? If empathy is basically showing an understanding for another person, that trying to see things from their point of view, which is so hard because we have our point of view that we know so well, and yet we're trying to get into the head of another person and show them that we understand theirs. Understanding is very different from agreeing, right? I don't have to agree with you to understand you. So the empathy piece of it is critical. I have spent a lot of time thinking about empathy and as it's related to communication and listening even. And I've discovered, just, sort of by observing, the more the greater the variety of people that are in your circle, the easier it is for you to empathize with other people. If you find, when you look at the people you spend the most time with, that they are all similar to you, same educational level, same kind of job, same neighborhood with the same kinds of houses and cars and everything else, you can empathize with those people because you understand them, you have similar experiences, but you're going to have a really hard time empathizing with somebody else who has completely different all of that. So I strongly encourage, especially my MBA students that I teach, to expand the types of experiences and people that you have these experiences with. That will greatly increase your ability to express empathy.
And I think you touched on this a little bit before, but I just kind of thought about it now. But is um, follow-up questions important, and can they be helpful to show that, like, hey, I was actually listening, to what you were saying?
Yes, they absolutely are important. And when I'm teaching rasa, that's what the A for the last A is, right? It's about ask. But students, when they're trying to practice their listening skills, what's really funny is because they're trying to remember a model too. So then truly they're trying to remember the model and they're trying to be good listeners and they're at odds. This goes back to our multitasking question that I had earlier. They're trying to multitask and it becomes difficult until mastering the Rasa model, and then you don't think about it anymore because it's natural. But I often have to tell students what a couple of good questions might be. So one is, tell me more. Tell me more about that. Or go on. Or can you give me some more information about that? That's an easy one when you're stuck and you don't know what to ask, but you do want to show the person that you are listening and you do care. Just say, tell me some more about that. You can also think about different things that they're saying, and you might want to know how they arrived at that decision, or how hard was that choice for them to make. What you want is not yes, no, not questions that can be answered with a yes or a no, because it kind of cuts it off, right? They're not saying more. And you're trying to get them to elaborate on things that they said earlier. So open-ended questions are the way to go for that final A in Rasa.
Mhm. And with those follow-up questions, is there a way where we can kind of maybe measure, and show that like, hey, they are showing that I was really listening, if that kind of makes sense, or do you kind of get what I'm getting at?
Um, Measure, like, do you mean measure, like, am I becoming a better listener or am I not? Or
Yeah.
how do you mean that?
Um, so can we tell if I ask a follow-up question, about, listening or whatever, can we tell by someone's responses like, hey, they really, are understanding me?
Yeah, I think I kind of have a sense for this one. The follow-up questions does make the speaker feel like you care about what they're talking about, and that gives it makes them feel seen and understood, especially when you get it, right?
Mhm.
And they're sort of having the spotlight. I like to describe it as when there's a speaker speaking and you're trying to show your best listening skills, the speaker has the spotlight. The attention is on them. There's going to be a moment when you actually do understand now, and you're going to know it and they're going to know it. And then the spotlight might shift over to you, and you might want to share something similar to what they had just described. So yeah, I think there can come a point after a couple of follow-up questions where both people, the speaker and the listener, do have a good understanding. But it might take some work. It just depends on how complex the topic is, how different their worlds are apart from one another. And so the listener should not be afraid to keep asking until they feel like they've reached an understanding from what the speaker said, and then the spotlight goes back to the listener and they become the speaker, and so on.
And it seems like, one of the big things is, it can be very challenging for folks to, not interrupt, especially when it's something,
Mm,
when they're listening and it's something maybe they don't agree with. So
mm.
just to know, how can we handle situations where maybe we disagree with the speaker, but, we still kind of maintain that active listening approach and obviously do our
Yeah,
best to not interrupt?
that is probably the billion-dollar question right now, especially given the divisiveness that we're all experiencing worldwide, not just in our country, but worldwide. A lot of times what people are doing is avoiding conversations altogether. And so then we're not increasing our understanding of people that don't believe the same as us. And this is very challenging, especially if you, as a listener, have huge emotions around a particular topic when somebody else is expressing something and they're on the complete opposite side or different viewpoint than you have. But if we stop talking about these things, we're not going to get any better. We're not going to understand. We're not going to have empathy. We're just going to have division. And to me, it feels like that's where we're at in a lot of things, in politics and a lot of places in the world. It seems like that's what's happening to us right now. What's really scary, and I'm going to tell you, I wouldn't tell the audience to do something I haven't done myself, but what's really scary is taking a hot topic, all right, our upcoming election. We're all going to be voting very soon for, and some of us already have, for the next president of our country. And it feels very divisive. It feels like people believe either one candidate is the best or the other candidate. And if you believe this candidate is the best, then we're going to judge the people over here and say there's something wrong with them. They're awful. And we're not going to try to understand and dig deeper and find out more about the things that they value in the candidate that we don't agree with. So if you truly do want to understand and have curiosity as you go into these conversations, you can learn something from another person who doesn't feel the same way as you without having to change how you feel. It just expands your worldview. You now understand someone else who had a different set of experiences than you did, but you don't have to do much beyond that. You don't have to change your mind, change who you're voting for, or even try to change theirs. All you need to do when you're trying to listen well, even if you disagree, is to just understand it, not judge it, be curious about it, learn something about another person if you want to maintain a relationship with this individual. When I say I won't have you do something I won't do, I'll tell you that my most difficult conversations like that occur within my own family because we are not all of the same political viewpoints. And it is very difficult to have political conversations when you you have this emotion and this passion tied to something, and so does the others. So you need to try to get a handle on your own emotions, try to understand what emotions they're expressing, and then have this conversation. If the goal is curiosity, if the goal is to understand and not to sway somebody to feel differently than they already do.
And I know, obviously just, like you said, with the, political climate right now, it seems like, neither side even wants to sit down and listen to each other. I say that because Melissa wanted to check in with a question and she wanted to know, how can we prevent ourselves from, zoning out essentially, or, somebody, on, a different side, than our own experiences, they're talking and we just kind of don't want to hear it. What are some ways we can prevent that from happening where we can like really lock in and try to understand what they're saying?
I think that I'm going to go back to the Rasa model. It saves me so many times. So when I feel judgment coming, or when I feel I can sense it in myself when I'm about to make a judgment or a statement, I might think, oh my God, well, you listen to that TV network. That's why you believe all of that. So I'm not listening to a thing you say. Very easy to do that, right? But that's a listening barrier. That is ineffective listening. If you truly, truly, truly want to understand what the other person is saying, hold back. Ask them some more questions about it. Like, where do you think that was sourced from? I'd like to get some more information about that without the judgment in your tone, right? Because your tone might give you away. That whole nonverbal communication, like, where'd you get that from? Like, where did you figure that out from? That's a very different question than, I'm interested in how you came to that particular, piece of data or that information, or where did that come from? So your tone of voice, back to what we said earlier about nonverbal communication, will make a difference there. But check yourself. Judgment is so easy for us. We judge all day long. It protects us. Stereotypes protect us. And we need to know, I mean, they protect us when our lives are in danger, but this is just a conversation. Presumably our lives aren't in danger, although there are some conversations that might put our lives in danger. But we're going to say this is a conversation where our lives are not in danger. Check yourself as you feel that judgment coming and replace it with curiosity. Let me be curious versus I'm judging.
That's good to know. And with that, you mentioned, kind of how we respond in tone and everything like that. And tone obviously can make a huge difference. So Esther checked in and she just wanted to know, do you have any advice on being an active and good listener while maintaining boundaries, maybe with someone who may have an aggressive communication style?
Yeah, it's really funny. When I teach the whole listening thing, the last thing I tell the students is, okay, now you're going to go out in the world. You have this wonderful, you understand better how to listen, and then you have a conversation with somebody who's horrible at it. And you feel like you're cheated because you can listen to them, but they're not listening to you. And it gets really difficult. And it's all about maintaining control over your emotions. And you are the only one that can do that, right? So you can, once you understand what you're feeling, what your boundaries are, you can say, you know what, this is a place where I really can't go any further. It's just not good for me. I need to stop this conversation now. I hope that's all right with you. And you can lay down your boundaries. Nobody's asking you to violate your own boundaries. But you got to know where those are. You've got to understand what your boundaries are and what your emotions are all about and what can trigger them. And if something feels unsafe to you, state it. Say, this is not feeling safe for me. I need to stop the conversation. I'm sorry.
And, what connection can we make between emotional intelligence, one, and being good active listeners? And really kind of how can we enhance, kind of both of those?
I think emotional intelligence, I would say that listening is probably a piece of every aspect of emotional intelligence. So if you think of what is emotional intelligence, well, there's a lot of things involved. Empathy. We've talked about empathy. We've talked about if you're going to be able to see things from another person's point of view, you need to go out there and expose yourself to a variety of different types of people so that you get a sense for how and why people who are different from you might do the things that they do. Listening is underneath of that. Building trust in relationships, being able to handle conflict. These are all signs of emotional intelligence. And coincidentally, these are all things we've talked about when we have talked about listening. So I'd like to say that listening sort of is the foundation for any aspect of emotional intelligence that you're trying to develop. So it's amazing to me that if you can really perfect your listening skills, you get a lot of bang for your buck right there. It's a great return on investment if you can really work on it. And working on it is going to take some time and energy and kindness to yourself, right? There's a lot of aspects of listening that we talked about here. My suggestion would be that you just pick one or two things. If you feel like you're always judging and you're not really all that curious but you want to be a good listener and you know that you're going to have to replace that judgment with curiosity, take a week and say, okay, I'm going to see how many times I can do this. I'm going to take a week of my life and I'm going to see when my judgment shows up and I'm going to try to replace it with curiosity. What alternative explanations could there be for this person's behavior or point of view? And I'm going to practice that for a while. And I'm just going to let that go. I'm not going to try all of rasa all at once. I'm just going to try this one little thing. All right. And that's going to help you over time as you take these things that you're practicing and they become habitual for you and they're no longer something that you have to practice, but they're your normal way. You can keep adding things until you become an effective listener, being able to listen at the very highest of levels.
And you kind of actually took the next question I wanted to
Oops.
ask you, but
Sorry.
no, it's all right. What is, maybe the first thing or, kind of the first step that we can do to, become better listeners? Is it asking those follow-up questions? Is it, taking a breath while someone's speaking? What's that kind of first step on this long journey for us?
That sounds good. I think either one of those works, but it really depends on the person, right? So for me, it's watching my judgment. For some reason, I do a lot of that. And so I've got to replace judgment with curiosity. So that's something I'm constantly reminding myself to do. Some other people feel like maybe distractions they just feel like they're going from meeting to meeting and they always have their phone open and they're always thinking about 100 million things. Slow down, try to step back. Maybe, your meetings are only 45 minutes long, so you have 15 minutes to sort of rest, recover, and get ready to be an active listener in that group meeting that's coming up next. Maybe that's your way. If you are someone who let's see, maybe you're not so good at the receiving part. Maybe you're not so good at the nonverbal and signaling to people that you're paying attention and making eye contact. Maybe that'll be your thing. So I think the biggest thing, Nicholas, there is to just start small and just take one thing that you feel you're not good at, given the whole list of things we talked about today, and try to perfect it, try to get better at it. And when you mess up, don't over criticize yourself. Just say, okay, I'm going to start again tomorrow, or I'm going to do this again the next day. Fail fast and then get better. Reflect on what you did wrong and then get better the next time.
And, just for me, I want to know what's kind of a way, or rather a gentle way to tell somebody to, like, maybe pause and let me digest, for a second. What's kind of a nice way to do that? But also show that I'm listening still.
So you want to pause when someone else is talking, you want to be able to pause, or is that what you're saying?
When
So
somebody
you
else,
can reflect on it.
yeah, so I can reflect. I hate like interrupting people. So it's like one of those things I just, am curious about. What are some ways we can, kind of tell the speaker like, hey, can you just give me a minute or something? Of
Yeah.
notes or something.
Yeah. I would say something like, that is what an amazing thought you just had. I just need a second to just reflect on it for a moment.
Mhm.
And then you can take your moment and reflect on it and then come back in and say, okay. And maybe you go back to asking another question when that reflection piece is done. Maybe you summarize something. After reflecting, here's what I think about what you just said. What do you think? So you can do that, but signaling that you want that time is important. Otherwise, because people are not comfortable with silence, there will be a constant stream of talking, going on and not much listening. So yeah, I would say something like, wow, that was incredible. I just need a minute to think about that.
Mhm. That's good to know.
And
I will.
yeah, notice my tone of voice too, right? I just need a moment to think about that. And you're trying to show kindness and you're trying to show that what they just said is that important to you that you really want to reflect on it.
That's good, and I'll remember that. And Steph actually checked in with a question. I wanted to make sure I got to her. She said, "People say it's rude to share similar stories, experiences instead of open-ended follow-up questions. But is it not a way of showing empathy and showing similar experiences? Is it always rude, or can it be a mode of connection and empathy?" So there's a lot. There's a lot
Yeah.
there.
No, I know that one. Stephanie, this is probably one of the most common questions I get when I'm teaching listening. And the biggest pushback that I receive from the students when I'm teaching this stuff.
Mhm.
And so it's okay, but not while the speaker has the spotlight. All right. Here's an example I like to give. So I am a Peloton user. I hope that's okay to say that. And I lost my shirt in the stock market, okay, but I still am loyal Peloton. So if there's anybody out there amongst the listeners who ride with Peloton or who use Facebook or social media to share something with another person, let's say I put on there, oh, I just got my 100th ride today and I'm so excited. And you want to say that you also got your 100th ride.
Okay.
Well, good for you. But guess what? That spotlight, I wanted to share with you how excited I was about my 100th ride. And you just stole that from me by sharing your 100th. And now the spotlight has left me.
Mhm.
After you kind of understand me and say, wow, you sound so excited about that. Like, what was it like? Who did you ride with? Who was your coach? Okay, now I feel like you're interested in me. And just that one or two summarization, asking a question. Now, if you want to tell me that you got your 100th ride,
Mhm.
great. But don't steal the spotlight too prematurely.
That's good to know. That definitely don't spotlight. I'll remember that one. Angela, it has really, really been a pleasure. Thank you so much. Before we wrap, my last question, for folks, kind of getting back to work or who really are just, interested in, kind of want to be better. Listeners, where should they take that first step, or what should they do as far as their first step goes to say, hey, I'm really gonna, try to be a better listener?
I think what we talked about earlier about just starting, I would use the RASA model. I live and die by that model. I love it from Julian Treasure. You can go watch his TED Talk if you want to, but I would look at those four components of being an effective listener, say to yourself, which one do I struggle with? Like give it a shot. And if you find yourself, you can't even focus, well, then start there. Or if you're struggling with the summarization piece, then maybe I didn't mention the feelings wheel, but you can Google feelings wheel and take a look at ways, lots of ways to increase your feelings vocabulary so you can get a handle on your own feelings and be able to empathize and understand what another person's feelings are. But I would take a look at that RASA model, find out where I'm weak, take a baby step in trying to improve my weakness and keep going until I can master the skill using RASA.
Awesome. Well, Angela, thank you again so much for
Thank
joining us.
you.
Audience, thank you so much for your questions. You really, really appreciate them. Before we wrap, just one thing, audience, let us know how we did. There's going to be a QR code at the top of the screen. We do read your feedback, so please feel free, give us some feedback. Let us know how we can improve things, we can change, everything like that. But again, thank you so much for sticking with us. Angela, thank you so much for being with us. And audience, have a
Thank you.
great rest of your afternoon, and we'll see you at the next keynote.
Okay, thank you.